Te kōtaka ngā kia ki te a koe, a Gina, tō mama, tō whaia, haere ki te kaihanga o Tarangi. Kia ora koe. Kia tau anō kia tātou katotia, ta whai o tō tātou ariki ai Ukraiti, me te aroa hao te atua me te whiwhinga taitanga ki te wairua tapu ai nei ake tono atu. Amen. May the grace of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us now and evermore. Amen.
Amen.
Madam Chair, just today, a mihi to our sister Gina, who only a week or so ago lost her mum. And so just today, a little mihi whakatau in a karakia for us. Kia ora koutou.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that, Trevor. Declarations of interest, Carl. Urgent items not on the agenda. Councillor Stewart.
Madam Chair, I've got a series of questions regarding legal costs incurred by this council by the challenge by the RDRRs and Mr McPherson in the District Court. And I have asked questions on this before. It's not on our agenda. Basically, the question I have of staff, and I'll ask it now so they can reply to it at the appropriate time. Has Mr McPherson or the RDRs made any contribution towards the legal costs on this challenge and or the challenge where it was alleged he defamed staff? I've asked this time and time again. Now he's gone public with an Auditor General inquiry request. I think it behoves the question on behalf of I'm a custodian of the ratepayers' money, and I think it behoves me to ask the question again: has Mr McPherson contributed anything towards the legal costs, and did council claim legal costs against Mr McPherson when both one was settled out of court and two, when the judge ruled the action that Mr McPherson took against the election, whether that was issued of costs? So when it's appropriate, Madam Chair, I'm happy that those questions.
Thank you. Well, it isn't appropriate at this time because this is it's not on the agenda, and no decision is to be made on the points that you've raised. Certainly, no decision here. I'll just take I'll take a bit of word of advice, I think, from our CEO as to when that can be discussed.
I'm quite happy that it'll be at the end of the agenda. I'm more than happy with that.
Yes, the CEO will seek some advisement on that matter and come back to us on that. Thank you. And we're talking about at some stage in the near future? Thank you. Yes, thank you. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to raise the issue of the traffic building up at the Hemo Gorge. Every time I'm coming through there, which is around about 9 o'clock, it's tailed back badly. And this morning, for example, it was tailed right back to the BP garage. I would just ask the Chief Executive to perhaps get his staff to investigate what the hold-up is, what the problem is, because we certainly don't want these sorts of hold-ups when we get into designing the roundabout for Tarawera Road.
Thank you. So I didn't.
There are questions that councillors would like to ask and to update them.
At the end of but in open forum. Yeah. Thank you. At the end of our meeting this morning, there'll be an opportunity for us to get a debrief on that, and also any other questions that people might want to raise of a general nature, such as you've just placed this morning. Thank you, Councillor Ken. Yes, Your Worship.
Not urgent, but at some stage I'd love to give an update on the meeting with the Minister on Freedom camping.
Yes, I think we'd be very interested in that. So we can take those at the end of our meeting. Thank you. And it will be in the open session as well. Thank you. So what I'd like to do now, thank you, councillors, is I'd like to move into the hearings, the traffic bylaw review hearings, and take those now because we do have two submitters. We had three, but one has now, unfortunately, is not able to attend. So this is the recommendation one, the traffic bylaw 2015 review hearings. Could I please have a mover and a seconder for this report to be received? Thank you, Mrs. Trumper. Thank you, Councillor Gould. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Thank you. So there were, as I said, 3 submitters, but Mrs. Bridson is now unable to attend, but we do have Mr. Roger Lovelace and Jamie Jamie, that's right, is here. So, Mr. Lovelace, if you'd like to come up to the table, thank you. Good morning and welcome this morning.
Good morning. Presumably green means it's on.
Yes, I think the green one will be on there, thank you.
Yes, as you can see, I'm a person with a disability using a wheelchair. I've been a resident of Rotorua for just about 11 months now, and I was concerned with the bylaw in that there was no provision for the design of shared paths to be up to modern standards. I'm confused driving around here when I come past the Fenton Street corner heading towards town. There's a what appears to be a shared sign there on the brickwork for that. Does that mean we can go along the Well, I'd like to point out that there are design standards for shared paths, and one of the things that on the NZTA website that is referred to for shared paths is a guidance note. It actually comes out of Queensland Government, but it's referred to on our NZTA website for guidance on width of shared and separated bicycle paths. It says the minimum width of those paths should be 2 metres if you've got people crossing, and we have a lot of cycle paths and things that appear to be underneath the verandas of shops and things like that. The signage seems to be a bit ad hoc. So if this bylaw is to go through and to be modified, the signage would need to be upgraded substantially and put a lot of effort into it. I'd also like to point out that I've got in front of me here a position statement by the Royal New Zealand Foundation for the Blind, access to the built environment shared spaces. Well, a little while ago when Jimano was in there, I rang up a guy called Chris Orr who works for the Royal New Zealand Foundation for the Blind in Auckland. I don't know whether this is true, but he said usually shared space designs come across his desk or he's aware of them. He was not aware of this one. Anyway, reading through from some of the thing from the position statement from the Royal New Zealand Foundation for the Blind, pedestrians who are blind or have low vision must have safe access to shared spaces. The guidelines for shared space design should always be followed when planning these spaces. Signage around shared spaces should clearly indicate correct behaviour for motorists and pedestrians. Blind Foundation would like the local government people to adhere to the Road Traffic Standard 14, guidelines for facilities for blind and vision impaired pedestrians in designing shared spaces. Include blind and vision impaired pedestrians in designing shared space schemes to ensure the standard is applied consistently throughout New Zealand. Ensure car parking facilities give the blind and low vision pedestrians priority in shared spaces and have entrances to adjacent parking facilities with full visibility for the driver exiting from a stopping point within the footprint of the building. Monitor the use of shared spaces to determine both vehicle speeds and driver behaviours and the safety and ease of use for pedestrians, which brings me on to the slow zone that's just been introduced in Haupapa Street. That parking there is, to be honest, a shambles. People don't know whether they're parking at 90 degrees or parallel to the curb. I have a vehicle that has a side entry ramp. It's a side entry ramp, not a hoist, but one of the spaces has this space reserved for vehicles with rear entry hoists, rear on side entry hoists. The trouble is with that, it's got what appears to be a seat to the left of the park if you're parking correctly, which means this is another one of these unusable parks for myself. So I hate to say it, but the design was not passed through, well, appears not to have been passed through people that have a recognition of the needs of a disability community. So I've got no problem with you having a bylaw, but when you're applying it to shared zones and shared cycle paths and things like that, I'm just asking you, please make sure the designs are appropriate to their needs. You may have seen me, I actually did write to the paper a little while ago about disabled parking too. I was in a disabled park, someone parked to the left of me and I couldn't open my ramp. Fortunately, I had somebody with me who could drive my car out and move it across so I could get in. But it needs a bit of thought, I think, to do that. And as I say, I've got no major problem with that, but please make sure they are designed appropriately.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Lovelace. Sorry. Yes, I'm sure that we do try to ensure that the shared spaces are going to be able to be shared by all, but obviously we need to be aware of the needs of everyone and not just a few, or the majority. There will be some questions, I'm sure. Your Worship, thank you.
Thank you, Roger, and for expressing that view, especially including the visually impaired. Have you ever been approached to be on our Disability Access Committee?
I'm already on your Rotorua Advisory accessibility
So
group. Yeah.
have these issues, were the issues that you raised today, those wider issues other than the bylaw, but the parking and things, were they run past that committee?
I have put a proposed submission for your long-term plan for them to consider. Mandy Gudgeon, who chairs that meeting, wants to put her own submission in there and suggested that members of the committee put in their own submission. So I'll be putting one on my own behalf to the long-term plan as well as their submission. One of the issues with parking, of course, is the CCS Disability Action now has a what they call Access Aware app, which I would hope and I would suggest Council consider in their long-term plan.
And just one other question, if I may,
Yes,
through the
certainly,
Chair.
certainly.
We're seeming to meet a new technological challenge of even bigger wheelchairs. We're seeing some that are almost mini cars, closed-in cabs. That's going to be quite a challenge for us. Do you know if they're in New Zealand yet?
Not yet. I think they are coming into Auckland now. With open at the front. There's smaller ones where you can put one wheelchair in.
Yeah.
They are coming. I think we need to make sure there's a distinction made between scooters, electric scooters, and electric wheelchairs. I saw an electric scooter in the library the other day. They're not really designed to go into buildings. They are designed for people that have a little bit of ambulatory capability with a stick or crutch or something like that, and should be able to leave them at the door and walk in. Yes, I've seen one of those try to get into a lift once too out in America, and some of those are really huge. I get your point.
Mr. Lovelace, signage, what exactly was the issue with signage there? I know you did say it's inadequate and needs to be...
Well, I'm confused. If you cross from Fenton Street, from Packensae coming down Fenton Street, you cross a sign on the road, on the footpath underneath the veranda. To me, that's hazardous because people... I don't expect that sort of thing to happen, and I suspect visitors wouldn't expect to see cyclists allowed to ride on a footpath that goes past shops and places like that. I think that is actually a no-no. One of the issues I find looking around Rotorua is we appear, according to the statistics, have about 2,500 people with a vision impairment, and I don't see very many of those people around. But the other issue with a shared path that isn't wide enough is that people with disabilities they don't have accidents because they're not there, because they're scared to use them. So somehow we need to bring them out. And when I was an access coordinator with CCS Disability Action, I initiated the idea of actually going out into the community and counting people with visible signs of disability. And, white canes are an obvious one there. And I suspect that people with vision impairment in Rotorua are, in a lot of cases, staying at home when they could be out in the community.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any further questions? Oh, yes, sorry, Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Good morning, Roger. Just two quick questions. Because I've noticed waiting to pick up my wife from her place of work when she nearly got her water cut off by a mobility scooter. What speed are they capable of, is one question. And the other one is your vehicle, which I've seen in operation, has a side entry, as you say. Is that commonplace compared to those with a rear entry for the ramp?
No, mine isn't commonplace. Bartangi Motors, when they're operating vehicle adaptation services, they modified about 150 of them. I think most of those are still on the road because we don't tend to change them very often because the modifications are quite expensive. I know there are 2 Mercedes Sprinters around town with rear entry things, and they are huge vehicles, yes. That's one of the issues, actually, is we're foisted off with big vehicles that have got horrendous fuel consumption. Coming back to your scooters and things like that, well, this wheelchair can now do 10 k's an hour. And this is just a wheelchair. And some of the other scooters, I understand, can go up to 10 or even 15 kilometres an hour. So they actually can be quite speedy. So there have been cases of people going too fast and driving them inappropriately. Same as there are bicycles, I suppose.
Thank you. Well, no further questions. So I want to thank you very much for coming in this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jamie Bridson, is Jamie here? Oh, apology. No? Thank you. Well, we'll have our first presentation this morning, and this is the, and if...
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Just before we move
Certainly.
off that topic, I'd just like to raise an issue that's come to my attention in reading this, that the proposed definition of shared zone is actually highly ambiguous. Perhaps the staff could have a look at that. They're talking about a shared zone, meaning a length of roadway intended to be used by pedestrian and vehicles, including cyclists. Well, any roadway that doesn't have a footpath fits that definition. So perhaps that definition needs looking at.
Thank you. Good point. Thank you.
And the second submission.
Oh, thank you. So are we, is this the Waikato Regional Council, or am I correct? Sorry? Are they the second submitters? No, sorry. So thank you. The Waikato Regional Council, this is the long-term plan update. Good morning, welcome. No mai hara mai, welcome this morning. I think your microphones will be on. And you do have a half an hour, and I hope you'll leave some time at the end of your half an hour, oh, sorry, before the end of the half an hour for questions, if that's all right. The other thing is, if you should not use your, if you don't wish to use the full half an hour, you'll have no problem with us on that score either. So it's, but half an hour has been a lot of your presentation. Thank you. Good morning.
Are you putting your papers? So, good morning, councillors. Some familiar faces, a very familiar room. With us today, we've got Councillor Kataraina Hodge and myself supporting Councillor Hodge, Tracy May, for those who don't know me, the Director of Science and Strategy with Waikato Regional Council. We do have a presentation. It should take us about 10 minutes to flip through that. We will just focus on the highlights. We do have hard copies of our documents, printed specially because we're not circulating hard copies of our documents, much like yourself. It's online. Thanks, Una.
Thank you.
We'll just chime in.
Mm-hmm.
Right, we're just organising who's doing what. So looks like you've got me for the majority. Some of you wouldn't have heard my voice for a long time, so there you go.
I'll just say thank you for having us. Morena koutou.
Morena.
Morena ki me rangatira ki roto te ruma. Yes, I'm Kataraina Hodge. This is my first term. And I'm going to leave a lot of it to Tracy, because she's been doing it for some time now, but I'll try and help where necessary. Ka pai tēnā.
So first up, the focus that we're taking with our LTP is kind of rewinding 10 years, reminding our community what we've done over the last 10 years, and also forwarding 10 years, what we're hoping to achieve in the next 10 years. We undertook some pre-engagement in it seemed like a long way away, but it was around August last year, came over here, and unfortunately the timing didn't quite work with one of your committee meetings. However, we did meet with some of your executive to discuss what some of the significant big issues are for the council. Most of those really focused on growth and infrastructure provision, the conversations we had. But we talked to a lot of people. A lot of people took the opportunity, much like they did with your good selves, to really give us some good feedback. From that feedback, the key issues that we were told are fresh water, no surprise to anybody, followed then by land use choices, because obviously land use and fresh water go hand in hand, regional development, and that means, of course, many things to many different people, and support community action. So that's one that, as a regional council, we've had a very clear message from the community to put the power as much as possible back in the community's hands and support what the community is wanting to achieve, but paint a holistic picture. So it's very similar. I read your consultation document yesterday. It's very, very similar. The key themes are coming through, which are very similar to your document. I guess not telling you anything you don't know, but our business is getting more expensive. So it's more expensive to do business. A lot of our drivers at the region are very, very similar to the same drivers that you have here in the Rotorua district. I guess our key one from a regional perspective is the sustainability of our flood infrastructure. I see some of your key issues are infrastructure and growth related. Good to see those issues still remain forever a challenge around tarawera and just providing for the growth of the city. So for us, it's the regional flood infrastructure, changing community needs, so our community's telling us a bit more about what they want as opposed to us telling them what we think we'll give them. Technology and information, everybody in this day and age is so information hungry, want the information right now at their fingertips, and I'm sure you've experienced, in lieu of having the information, people will fill that gap with other information. So really just keeping up with that. And bless central government, the increased responsibilities that they are knowing that we will deliver on, but it is a significant driver. For us, our biggest cost driver in the LTP is the sustainability of our flood infrastructure. I'm sure you saw some of the photos at Kaiawa just a couple of months ago. You know, we've got saltwater intrusion right down into the Hauraki Plains, and there's questions that people are asking, should we still be farming the Hauraki Plains as we're farming them now? Should we still be investing in a flood infrastructure that is quite significant? Throughout the region, it's around 496 million that ratepayers invest in that. So it's a big issue. We've got climate change, factoring that into account. We've got age. Many of these things were built 50 years ago, and 50 years ago, that was an age. That was looking long term, but a lot of them are coalescing now, so we have to have a look at it. Our expanding urban environments, you'll be only too aware of the increased health and safety requirements and increased compliance costs in order to protect the environment. So a real challenge for our councillors, and the challenge that our councillors shared with us as staff, was really how do we balance those costs with affordability to our community. So I imagine incredibly similar conversations to what your good selves have been having, trying to progress your LTP. So for the first time, we are proposing to take on external borrowing. So for me, having spent a lot of my life at territorial authorities and working at the region, it's the first time I've worked for a local government entity that doesn't carry debt. So this is the first time we'll be looking to carry that debt. We have talked to our auditors, and they say that it is a better way of managing than just looking at internal borrowing. So that's what we're going out to consult on. What it enables us to do is match the funding over the lives of the assets. So again, something that I know is always a hot topic around this table. And with the intention, obviously, of ensuring things are more affordable for our ratepayers. I guess just to make the topic a bit relevant to your good selves, the proposed rates increase, so this is what we have modelled here. Thanks, as you're a start. So overall, the rates increase will be less than $50 per year for 82% of our ratepayers. So what does that look like for your ratepayers and that portion of the district within the Waikato Regional Council Rohi? It's mapped out there, and on the consultation document on page 32 there are the ubiquitous modelling of rates to valuations. So it's in there, it's also online, so anyone can plug their property in and determine what it means for them. So we've got 8 key topics, and there are a couple there that I'd like to draw your attention to. The key one, so we've talked about the use of the investment fund. We'll be looking to fund depreciation of our assets, which is changing the way we pay to smooth it out, so we don't, our ratepayers, predominantly targeted ratepayers for our flood schemes, aren't getting a hit in year 1 or 2, that we're averaging that out over a number of years. Pest management, you would have heard about myrtle rust, you would have heard about velvet leaf. These are the wallabies. Yes, we're fast learning about wallabies. Thank you. But pest management, you know, we don't just look at it from a pest perspective anymore. It very much is a regional development and economic development impediment, really, with some of the significant crops in the Waikato. Catchment rates for new works, so our ongoing programs there that we undertake in conjunction with many landowners. Community facilities framework, so in the Waikatos there are another 10 councils other than yourself, and everybody's always vying for infrastructure. So what we've been asked to consult on is a way we can make a good decision about that infrastructure in either a sub-regional or regional manner, which then, something that's run ahead of that program, is the regional theatre. So I would bring it to your attention because there are proposals in our LTP around consultation on the regional theatre, and I'll get to that, but it is something relevant for this district because one of the proposals is a proposed regional rate for a regional theatre in Hamilton. So Mayor Chadwick has just had a facial reaction to that. So I wanted to make sure that you've got it in your sight so you can provide some comment on it, because I'm only too aware of the investment over the last decade really in the theatre to serve this community. So please, wanted to get that on your radar. A regional services fund, so we always have that challenge of funding our volunteer services, and I'll talk a bit more about that. And another late starter, but is creating a bit of noise, is the Hamilton to Auckland passenger rail service. So we've talked about the investment fund return, I won't go through that. Depreciation of assets, again, we've got a couple of options there. So fully fund as we go, or don't fully fund in years 1 and 2, so that's to smooth the curve. We've talked about pest management. Again, it comes with a cost, whatever we decide. Our catchment rates for new works. So with respect to that portion of our rohi within the Rotorua district, the main focus for increase there is in the upper Waikato. So that is to assist some partnering opportunities that we're doing with Te Aroha River Iwi Trust and the Whirinaki Arm, thumbs up from Eugene. So that's the increase there, but pretty much the level of service for the majority of that area will remain the same. The folk who are serviced by us there, other than a few niggles when things flood, are pretty much happy with the level of service that they receive. Community facilities framework, talked about that. Regional theatre. Okay, so for those who have the document in front of them, if we turn to page 24, it outlines there what the options are for the regional theatre. We've got one option, and this is something that our councillors have not had their own decision on yet, but made a decision to go out and consult the community. So I think I just want to be very clear there, council hasn't reached a point of view. We've had some robust discussions, but council passed a recommendation to go out and consult. So there are 5 options there, ranging from a status quo right through to 5 million contribution being collected from the region to fund the capital component. We've had a lot of conversations from our constituent councillors from Taupo and also from Thames Coromandel District Council in terms of that regional benefit. So, and South Waikato also. So I just wanted to draw that to your attention, because if there's nothing else that gets you excited in the LTP, I hope this does. Regional Services Fund. So as I'm sure you will also have many people coming asking for funding for the regional services. So at the moment, our council fund Surf Lifesaving, Coast Guard and the Phillips Search and Rescue Trust and the Coromandel Rescue Helicopter. So we've got some additional options here. We know the value that Landsar provides, and even Surf Lifesaving for our coastal areas. While many of you here live by lakes, I'm sure you manage to go to the coast as often as you can with that fabulous summer we've had. The passenger rail service, look, I'm not sure it's a key issue for you, but please, if you're interested, join the throng of folk in Hamilton and the North Waikato who are also interested. And there will be a targeted rate, the option 3 there, that is not intended to come onto any of the ratepayers within the Rotorua district. One thing that will be important for your operational arm here at council, your infrastructure arm, we are looking at changing our water use charges. So there is a change there from an operational perspective. I think, with my mind casting back, there are no consents for water takes. I'm not sure though, and your infrastructure folk will advise you. So that's a bit of a whistle stop. We're out for consultation from the 16th of March until the 16th of April. We'll be having, our councillors will have their ears on and listen very intently that week in May, make the deliberations. I'm hoping to adopt in June. I do have just 2 more slides of something that's coming up that I'd like to draw your attention to, which is our representation review for our councillors. So at the moment, that's what our constituencies are made of. We've got our Hamilton, our Taupo, Rotorua, Thames Coromandel, Waiho, Waikato General, Waipa King Country. We've got our 2 Māori constituency seats, of which we've got Kataraina here today. Council will be undertaking, there's a diagram now, we will be undertaking a formal consultation process. Thankfully it'll be once we've got the LTP out of the way, otherwise the LTP team might all run from the building. And we'll be looking to have submissions around there. Just did want to flag it for you, just so you're aware, in case there are some conversations that you would like to have or would like any further information. Catalina, anything you'd like to add?
Not at the moment. No, not at all. Not in the Southwest.
So it is very much a whistle stop.
Yes. Thank you very much, Tracy, and obviously for the work that's gone into it by the staff over at Waikato Regional Council. Thank you. It just gives us a good look at what people are doing on the other side over the hill, and we share a commitment to our communities to try and get it right if we can, and the consultation means that we can go out and get the feedback from our community on their priorities. So thank you for your presentation this morning. Would you be able to take some questions? I'm sure there'd be some interest.
Right.
Thank you. I'd like Councillor Stewart first, please. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. I also take up your challenge regarding the regional theatre. I mean, this is a huge change in focus, because if this goes through, I mean, we could have proposals for regional sports stadiums, regional skate parks, regional whatevers, and it gives an opportunity for someone who wants to do something to extend that arm to the regional focus. This council has been very proactive. We were the only TLC that put money into the Cambridge velodrome. We were the only TLC, and outside the Cambridge area, if you like. So we have got a track record of looking at things regionally, but I'm sure this has created huge debate, because a regional theatre based in Hamilton, it's like having a regional orchestra, a regional adventure park? I mean, where does this start and where does it finish? So I'd be interested in why this came about. Who brought this up? Was it the Hamilton City Council, or was it from a regional point of view? I mean, what I've got to come to terms with is my farmers out at Rotorua are going to be asked to contribute through their regional rates to a regional theatre in Hamilton, which is so far removed from where they live. And I understand your comments, Tracy, regarding the Coromandel people too are just so far removed from Hamilton City. So I'd be interested in the methodology of this focus.
Through you, Madam Chair. So the desire and the recommendation placed in front of our councillors to go out for consultation on this came through two avenues. Through Hamilton City Council, representation from His Worship Mayor King, and also through the Waikato Mayoral Forum, as something that they asked the chair of that forum, who happens to be our chair, Councillor Alan Livingston, to suggest it to our councillors as something they would like to consider. So the Mayoral Forum doesn't have any statutory weight to pass decisions, we're aware of that, but it was something that the mayors said, look, it's probably good part of a regional conversation, but it predominantly came through from representation from His Worship Mayor King through to our councillors to consider for consultation. And as you correctly pointed out, Councillor, there has been a lot of robust discussion, and our councillors believe let's get it out there for consultation so we can get some good submissions back.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson? Oh, yes. You have another question?
Staff, through to staff, do we get an opportunity as an organisation to make a submission regarding this, and when will we have that debate in terms of what we do submit? Because there are some major focuses in this plan, which are some I'd like to support, and some I think we need to question their sustainability.
Do you care to answer that? Thank you, Una.
Yes, there will be an opportunity for our council to put together a submission. We will start on that shortly, and we will bring that back to you for discussion before it gets submitted.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Tracy, my question is around also the regional theatre, and I was a founding trustee on the Avanti Drome Trust, the Homocycling Charitable Trust, along with former Mayor Alan Livingston. So it's around the note attached to funding options 2 to 5 that Hamilton City ratepayers will be excluded from any regional targeted rate. Now, Rotorua Lakes Council, as Councillor Sturt pointed out, along with Waipa District Council, were the only two TLAs that contributed, and to my knowledge, they weren't excluded from the regional council targeted rate. So Waipa put in $1 million, we put in 100,000 and undertook to upgrade infrastructure here around mountain biking to $500,000. But we weren't, our ratepayers in your rohi weren't excluded from the targeted rate, which I think was about $4 a year for 14 years.
Yep.
So the question is, what is the quantum that Hamilton City ratepayers are contributing compared to what's being targeted to the rest of the region, and really, you know, how do they get off the hook, given that precedent?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. So the total cost of the regional theatre development is $73 million. Of that $73 million, $25 million will be contributed to from Hamilton City Council, from their ratepayers. $5 million is what has been identified through the economic assessment as the regional contribution to be taken from the regional suggestion, that is sourced from the rest of the region ratepayers, with the remaining 43 from philanthropics and contribution from central government. So that many people have asked that question, though.
Gould?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Tracy, for your presentation this morning. I noticed you didn't talk about gorse or blackberry on the side of the roads affecting different parts, because blackberry is actually getting more of a nuisance on the Tauranga side, but I don't know about the Waikato side, because that's one way of trying to improve water quality is to reduce the gorse on people's property near streams.
Through you, Madam Chair. So gorse and blackberry are usually tended to, just as a matter of course, through our business as usual, I guess, approach to pest management. They weren't identified as significant pest management species such as velvet leaf or myrtle rust, such that we needed additional funding for it. Fully aware of the many reports on gorse and its relationship to water quality, but at this stage we don't believe that any additional funding other than what's in business as usual would be required for those kind of run-of-the-mill pest plant species.
Thank you. Councillor Kent?
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Can you please explain to me, I'm looking at page 11 and I'm somewhat mystified here. You've got, under your rates revenue, you're showing that you're going to be increasing rates revenue by 50% over the 10-year plan period. You then go on to say that you're aiming to limit the total increases in rates revenue from current ratepayers to no more than 9% in any year, but increases will be higher in the first 3 years. So exactly what sort of rate increases are you inflicting? Because you're showing here 12%, 13% and 11% on targeted rates, as well as 4%, 5% and 5% on overall rates. So what is the actual rate increase for each of the first 3 years, please?
So the, and sorry, I don't have that right at my fingertips, Councillor Kent, but what we have been quite explicit about is the rates, the general rates increase is considerably less than the targeted rates increase. Without some of our measures to look at affordability, some of the targeted rates could potentially be up around 27%, particularly for those folks in the Waiho-Piako catchments where all of their infrastructure is coming up for renewal. So the statement there around the rates revenue for the first 1, 2 or 3 years is there on the graph on page 11. I can get back to you with the exact details. I don't actually have those at my fingertips, but it's fair to say that Council has looked at all measures possible to make our rates more affordable, particularly the targeted rates. We have enjoyed a period over the last 3 years of relatively small rates increases. Our council has set ourselves a target of less than 5% as a rates increase, and there are some decisions that have to be made, some options that we're going out to consult on that will determine what that rates increase is. But I can get those exact figures to you so you've got them in front of you.
Thank you. That would certainly help, because if you're averaging the rates increase of 50% over the 10 years, and most of it's happening in the first 3 years, it's significantly higher than 5% rate increases overall. So I would certainly appreciate seeing the figures, please.
Yep,
Thank you.
I'll get those to you.
Thank you. Your Worship?
Just a couple of issues. You've got water quality as well as pest management. One question about catfish. Have you got catfish in your catchment? It doesn't seem to feature here. And the other is the relationship with the University of Waikato for the development of the Freshwater Centre of Excellence. Are you a funding partner of the Freshwater Centre of Excellence that's currently based in Hamilton?
Through you, Madam Chair, Your Worship, we very much have a very active program in regard to pest fish species. And I should say the other key program that we will be looking at in the LTP is fish-friendly passage for our native fish species, which is quite a significant work program. So we have some localised intrusions of catfish. We have more wider dispersal of koi carp, and we have a very active program of managing that. Without being too provocative, trout could also be viewed as a pest fish species, but we're all friendly with the trout. The pest fish are very, very much part of our program with regard to the Freshwater Institute, the University of Waikato. So we are we fund the chair to the tune of $150,000 per annum. That's in our business as usual. That is a synergy between the Rivers Chair that is funded by Bay of Plenty Regional Council. We have a very strong connection with Professor James Brasington, who's been appointed as the chair of that institute, the director of that institute. We're working very closely with our 5 river iwi and our Hauraki iwi, and also with Waikato River Authority, to make sure we're focusing on the right things and getting maximum value from the work program. At the moment, it is just preliminary conversations on that work program. We'll very much be interested in some conversations with yourself and Bay of Plenty Regional Council, because we're all dealing with those issues around
Same
lakes.
issues.
Yeah.
Thank you. We'd be interested, but we'll submit that back. And a little supplementary, if I may. I won't go on about the theatre, we'll submit to that, but
Please do.
I'm interested that the regional orchestra, the Opus Orchestra, isn't in here. And I'm aware that they're in a funding, quite a crisis at the moment. Why was that left out?
We haven't heard from the orchestra, to be honest. It may come through in submissions.
Okay, thank you. I'll take only 2 further questions, and that's from Councillor Maxwell and Councillor Hunt. Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tēnā kōrua, e te mea ki a koe karawana. Just two questions. One is first on the representation review. I was trying to find it in here where I can have a quick read of it, but is the desire, you have 14 councillors now, is there a desire to bring it down or increase it? And the other one is the Maori representation, would the status quo remain?
Through you, Madam Chair, there is no desire, Council's desire will not be to change the Māori constituencies or the 14 councillors. Council had a discussion about that just prior to Christmas. It seems to be working well. This poor lady here has quite the job in terms of her constituency, which is quite significant, all of the light blue there on the right-hand side. But we haven't heard anything that would lead us to believe it needs to change at this stage.
In the heart of the Kingitanga movement.
Aye.
And my second question, it is around the theatre, and I think this is a good move in a way for Waikato Regional to look into working with all the district to work towards that. Having been somebody who's performed in the old Founders Theatre on many occasions, and I think that's not going to be the site, is it? It's going to be on the banks of the river? Or?
The proposed site at this stage is down the southern end of Victoria Street. What was where the old post office is, where the museum is, close by there, to be on the riverbank.
And the other one, I tried to have a quick read on page 24 here. Waikato University have a lot of ceremonies there for throughout the year. I don't see them here as a contributor, or are they the ones who are going to come on board later, perhaps?
Through you, Madam Chair, look, I'm not sure. I would anticipate Hamilton City's had some conversations with the University of Waikato, but I haven't heard anything about them making a contribution at this stage.
Yeah. And because, as you know, we're going through our long-term plan with looking at Sir Howard Morrison Centre as well as our own museum and things like that. But good luck with that, and kia ora with Kitty Law as well.
That's not on our long-term plan. That's Hamilton's.
And final question, Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. Tēnā kōrua. I just have a quick question about the capacity for the theatre. Kind of what size and are you looking at, so that I can kind of get some feel for what sort of things you would be attracting there?
So through you, Madam Chair, I think we're not looking at the theatre.
No.
Hamilton City, I would direct you to the Hamilton City website. We're just looking at a potential model for rating. I think I would say big. Councillor Hunt, with my extensive knowledge of theatres, just the demand is there for a performing theatre from what I understand, but I'd direct you to the detail through Hamilton City Council.
Thank you, because that will actually inform the sort of support and the feeling around the table. Okay, thank you for that.
Well, thank you very much,
Thank you.
both of you, Tracy and Katharina, for coming along this morning. We found it very interesting. Thank you very much. Kia ora.
Well done, Tracy.
Can I just ask, is Jamie Bridson here? Thank you. I'm going to just ask councillors that we take the Jamie's submission to the traffic bylaw 2015 that we started with.
Well, whilst he's coming to the table, Madam Chair,
Jamie, if you'd like to come and take a seat up at the table.
can I ask the question that this regional council LTP would be referred to the Rural Community Board so that they can have some input into the challenges that this regional council are making in terms of the LTP.
Thank you. I'll just make Mrs. Trumper aware of that. Thank you. Yes, it's been suggested, Mrs. Trumper, that this, the Waikato LTP, the Waikato Regional Council LTP plan that we've just heard discussed and explained this morning be referred to you, to the rural community, because obviously it will affect members of your community too, yes. And we'll be making a submission too, won't we, Una? So yes, so it might be, you've got a copy, I think, have you? There was.
I've only just got one. Right.
Fine, thank you.
Oh, good.
Thank you very much.
I'm just asking for some more, so.
Good morning, Jamie. Jen Bridson was
Yeah,
going?
that's my wife. She couldn't make it.
She
today
couldn't make it, thank
due
you.
to, child minding commitments.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm happy that you're here this morning so that we can hear you speak to your submission. Welcome. You've got 10 minutes, and if you'd like to use the whole of the 10 minutes for your submission or allow a little time at the end for questions, it'll be over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Kia ora. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today at this hearing related to the traffic bylaw review. I speak in support of the proposed inclusion of the definitions of a shared path and shared zone and all clauses regarding their regulation. Today, I will outline the key reasons I support this amendment and also provide a vision for what transport in Rotorua could look like and how we can lead our nation in this critical aspect of society. First, the predominant mode of transport that is catered for in our city, and indeed all New Zealand cities, is the motor vehicle. Motor vehicles generally cater for the wealthier socio-economic groups of society. We know from census data that nearly 1/3 of households with income under $20,000 per year do not have access to a motor vehicle. In contrast, less than 1% of households with income greater than $100,000 per year do not have access to a motor vehicle. Access to motor vehicles is strongly dictated by wealth. Further, single-parent families have significantly lower access to motor vehicles, with nearly 13% not having access, compared with the national average of only 4% for one-family households. Access to transport options are limited in these households. Furthermore, access to motor vehicles is lower for Māori and Pacifica, with twice the national average not having access to a motor vehicle. When one drives a motor vehicle, they have high-quality infrastructure and can easily and safely access most parts of our beautiful city. Those who do not have the luxury of a motor vehicle find the alternative options of comparatively poor standing. I know this firsthand when trying to commute around our city by bicycle. I am treated as a second-class road user. My journeys by bike are often punctuated by close calls, near misses, and disrespectful behaviour from motorists. If we are to provide equal opportunities for our citizens to move freely around our city, regardless of wealth, family situation, age, health, or ethnicity, we need to improve our shared paths and shared zones. Rotorua is making some great progress in this regard with the Skyway and NZTA investments in wider and well-maintained routes along our key transport corridors. I experienced this morning along Fenton Street, the Green Corridor as well. These paths and areas provide an alternative option for users who choose or are required to travel using modes of transport other than a motor vehicle, or for those who lack the skill and confidence to cycle, for example, with the vehicle traffic. The proposed changes to the traffic bylaw to include the definitions of a shared path and shared zone are critical for the wider requirements to ensure equal access to our transport infrastructure. This proposed change is a step in the right direction. The second point I'd like to address: our generation is facing unprecedented issues around climate change. Transport is one of the single largest contributors to carbon dioxide emissions, a major greenhouse gas, contributing 37% of the New Zealand total carbon dioxide emissions. One of the easiest and lowest hanging fruit to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions is to reduce our reliance on motor vehicles for transport. This is especially so for short distance journeys in our city. 1/6 of household car trips in New Zealand are under 2 kilometres, and almost half are under 6 kilometres. These short distance car trips are particularly polluting and could be easily replaced using alternative modes of transport, such as walking or cycling. To encourage more people to consider these alternatives, we must have adequate infrastructure, which includes shared paths and shared zones. In addition, due to sustainability and cost factors, there's going to be a rapid uptake of electric bikes in New Zealand. We need to have our shared path and shared zone facilities prepared for this. Improving the shared footpaths and zones, supported by appropriate bylaws, would make this form of transport more accessible and safer for our community. In addition to the sustainability benefits, walking and cycling also bring benefits for our community, including health and well-being and reduced vehicle traffic congestion. The third point I'd like to address: footpaths are required to accommodate a wide range of transport modes and users, such as walkers, runners, parents with young children, physically disabled using wheelchairs, skilled children accessing the education facilities, elderly using mobility scooters, and many others. Furthermore, cyclists, including parents riding with their young children, are legally not allowed to use footpaths when their bikes are over a certain size, forcing children as young as 4 to 5 to be legally required to ride on the road. I know this firsthand as my 5-year-old son has learned to ride a 16-inch bike. Legally, he must ride on the road and not the footpath. Many of these users are our most vulnerable citizens. On many of the transport corridors in our city, all of these users are confined to a narrow, barely more than 1 metre wide, often uneven and regularly overgrown footpath. To ensure all these users have access to a safe and enjoyable passage, it is critical that we make significant improvements in this infrastructure. To develop appropriate transport infrastructure to accommodate all of these users requires many aspects, including the tangible facilities, i.e. the path, but also advocacy, social acceptance, and the perception of safety. The proposed amendments to the traffic bylaw to include definitions of a shared path and shared zone are key elements to support the improvements of this infrastructure. Lastly, I'd like to share my vision for what I believe Rotorua should aspire towards in regards to our transport network. Rotorua is ideally positioned to become the leading New Zealand city, providing equal opportunities and access to multiple transport options that are safe, healthy, and environmentally sustainable. We should look to Northern Hemisphere cities such as Copenhagen, Amsterdam, or Portland for examples. Why is Rotorua ideally positioned? I believe it is because of our small size and population, making our city easily accessible to alternative transport modes. Most journeys to access our high-quality facilities would be less than 5 kilometres in distance. Our city terrain is generally reasonably flat, making the options of walking, cycling feasible. Most of Rotorua's amenities are centrally located, including the shops, parks, the new library and health services. And importantly, because of our tourist attractions and mountain biking mecca, our city already has a major focus on walking, cycling and running. All of these factors make the transition out of motor vehicles and onto the paths considerably easier for us here in Rotorua. Apart from these aspects, our socio-economic makeup demands that we take alternative transport modes seriously and begin to provide suitable infrastructure for all of our citizens, not just those privileged enough to own will be able to use a motor vehicle. I believe the transport model of Portland is one that would suit Rotorua very well. Portland has developed neighbourhood greenways. These are residential streets designed to prioritise cycling and enhance conditions for walking. These streets are where people want to bike, walk and play. The designated greenways are those with low number of vehicle movements, such as local neighbourhood service streets with speeds of less than 30 kilometres per hour, with engineering measures to slow motorists, such as speed bumps, islands and traffic diverters. These traffic calming techniques encourage motor vehicles to use the nearby main streets rather than cutting through neighbourhood streets. Combining Portland's neighbourhood greenway approach in our suburban areas in Rotorua, together with our developing sideway infrastructure of shared paths along our main transport corridors, would provide a cohesive transport network, allowing alternative modes of transport to safely and effectively access most parts of our city. Rotorua can and should lead New Zealand in our transport infrastructure, providing high-quality facilities for all modes of transport and all people, including our children, elderly, those without access to motor vehicles, generally our most vulnerable citizens. The benefits are too great to ignore: social, health, and environmental sustainability. The proposed amendment to the traffic bylaw to introduce definitions for shared paths and shared zones is a key piece of regulation to achieve a safer, more sustainable, and more inclusive transport network. Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you very much, Jamie, for your presentation this morning. It was wide-ranging and very, very well put. As you can imagine, and I personally share your vision that you've just outlined to us, but as you can imagine, it's been quite challenging for some of our citizens who are used to jumping in the car and going everywhere, even if it's a 2-minute commute. The car's there at the park there and that's it. So, but would you take some questions? I'm sure there'll be a question or two for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Berryman-Camp?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And look, thank you for an excellent submission and certainly took all that. And I appreciate some of your points about, which I hadn't really considered in terms of cycles as a mode of transport for that crosses all socio-economic groups as well too. And I reflect on some of our kōrero in particular who are known to ride around town on their bikes. Actually, though, Madam Chair, I just need to check because my question is actually one for staff stimulated by this submission. Is that?
Yes, that'd be appropriate.
Thanks. And apologies, I hadn't really thought this before, but we're talking shared pathways, shared zones, and certainly I'm aware in some overseas cities there's shared cycles. Has there been any work done by this council or any approach by any business or company that's looked at setting up shared cycles in town so that we have the cycleways, but we also have the bicycles available for people to ride from one part of town to the next? If I could have that update, please, that would be good.
Like they do in Silicon Valley and some of those big complexes. Yes, I'm not sure about that. I'll just ask. We've had approaches, so let's say we've had approaches, which would be ideal, wouldn't it? You could just jump on, get off, and away you go. So we've had approaches, but I think at this it's quite early days yet. So that might go some way to answering your question. Thank you. Councillor Tapsell?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation. It's been both eye-opening and inspirational. You mentioned the neighbourhood greenways in Portland, and I'm aware that over there the cyclists and pedestrians are prioritised over the motorised vehicles. Is that included in part of your vision that you have about adequate infrastructure, that they will be prioritised over the the cars? And also, what do you think about Aotearoa? Is that a good start in your eyes for what could be New Zealand's leading city?
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, the Portland example, they are using this on their sort of neighbourhood streets that are only accessing a small number of houses. So they put in engineering measures so that cyclists, walkers and vehicles can use the street, but through the engineering measures, the vehicles are required to travel very slowly and they are discouraged from using them as shortcuts. They have a grid system, which I guess is quite different to a lot of parts of our city, but I think that in the suburban areas, together with the shared paths along our main transport corridors, would be a good solution for our city. And secondly, Te Manawa, yeah, I love it. I try to go through it as often as I can when I'm walking or biking or with my family.
Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Jamie, for your submission. And I think shared path is the way of the future. I just don't agree with you on the costings of when you did with regards to socio-economic and all. I bought a car recently for my son, my youngest son, and it cost me $2,500. Every time I go to buy a bicycle or upgrade his bicycle, it cost me around $4,500. My youngest son bought a bike that he wanted a $6,500 bike, but I got him a $4,500 one, and I said, okay, that'll be the next upgrade. But if you go for anything under $4,500 for what they want to do, it's almost unbelievable. So there's quite a huge cost as well. On the dark side, we always hear of stories of cycling against motor vehicles. You know how rude some of the motor vehicle and the hostility towards it. I think there are quite a lot of first-hand experiences as well. Happened to me yesterday. And it's not the dark side, but it does happen that when you're walking on the shared path and somebody's coming flying on a bicycle, they don't slow down. They go whizzing past you with no respect as well. So I think it's a two-way street. We just need to learn to respect each other, and that's what we're coming at. So the pathways of the future are good, but there's a cost factor in bicycles as well. And I think the cars certainly are a lot cheaper.
Was there a question there, Councillor Kumar?
No.
What do you think?
No.
Sid? What do you think?
Thank you.
Yeah, what do you think?
Jamie, you don't have to open that if you don't want to. That's last comment, but feel free to if you wish.
Just briefly, I guess your children, you say you're buying a bike for, they obviously are very keen mountain bikers or road cyclists. So, yeah, you can buy bikes for all sorts of price range from $50 to thousands and thousands. Yeah, I agree.
Thank you. Now, Mayor Chadwick, question.
For the submission, we'd love a full copy because of our relationship on the Regional Transport Committee. Some of the facts in there were very interesting. My question to you is, are you on the Cycle Action Group that's helping us with the Skyway development and other initiatives?
No, I'm not. I did look into that, but I haven't got overly.
But it's a great submission,
yeah.
thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, Ms Mohi.
Kia ora, Jamie. Nā mihi ki a koe mo tō kōrero ai. Hei kōrero tino whakahere kia mātou. Just wanting to, I spent a few weeks in Wellington recently. We were actually more on the waterfront there, and that area is quite what I would consider to be a shared space. You've got all sorts of types using that area, and some of the area gets quite narrow, particularly the bridges that join some of the jetties and things like that. And what happened, we'd find that they had, whether it was something that the council had promoted, or there was a bit of an unspoken courtesy going on between the bikes and the pedestrians, whether it was somebody would ring their bell as they're coming up behind you, or whistle, or say something so you knew they were coming and you'd step aside. And I think that might address one of the questions or the inquiries that were raised. But do you see that the Wellington example might be a good case study for broadening our understanding of how we could work better with the shared footpath type situation?
Thanks. Yeah, I haven't actually spent overly amount of time in Wellington, so I have to take your experience. So it sounds like they are one of the cities in New Zealand that are using different modes of transport a lot better than, say, we are here.
Travelling on cycleways.
But I guess in terms of the sharing and that sort of common courtesy, I'm not exactly sure how these this amendment to the bylaw and the clauses that are in there, but they seem reasonably open and providing provision for council to sort of direct and encourage that sort of shared common courtesy that is required in these shared paths.
Thank you. I'm going to draw a close to the questions now. Thank you very much, Jamie, for your submission, and we would like a copy of what you have read out to us, particularly with those statistics that you quoted. I think there was a lot of information. Certainly to me, I wasn't aware a third of the households here had no availability of a car or transport in that way. So we would appreciate that. And thank you for taking the time to really giving us a lot of food for thought. It is a big issue. It's a big issue around the country about how we do it. And there are a few teething issues that naturally go with a significant change. But I would like to thank you from the rest of this committee for your presentation and your submission. Kia ora.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to be moving on to a presentation from the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, long-term plan update, and I would like to invite Councillor Winters and Councillor Thurston and Sarah Omundson to the presenters table, and anyone else you've brought with you. Could you please, there's one more whom I don't know, could you please introduce?
Take no prisoners.
Tēnā koutou, councillors and staff.
Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora.
Kia ora mai koroma, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Nō reira I māti atu te tau I whakakahi manake, tēnā koutou. Kia ora tātou katoa.
Kia ora la.
Ko mātou te kunahira o nā toi moana, and ki kono mātou ki te whakahaere kai mahi. So, greetings everyone, I'm back, Kevin's back, so be prepared for us. Okay, what I'd like to do, if you'd allow me to have the staff come and join us behind. So,
yes, please.
So bring your chairs up, everyone.
Introduce the whole team.
Yep. We have an apology today, Madam Chair, from Chairman Leader. There's an apology from Councillor Tahana. Councillor Winters is known to everybody here. We have Sarah Omundson with us, our General Manager of Integrated Catchments, and Clinton Nord, who's well known as the Director of Emergency Management for the Bay of Plenty. Helen Cray, well known to everyone, who is the Manager of our Rotorua Catchments. Helen, right behind me here. And Mark Lecomte, who's our Corporate Performance Program Manager, Shane Grayling, our Biosecurity Team Leader, and Melissa Winters, Transport Operations Officer. And if I can just all give you some high level of reassurance to know that whilst I may be a doyen of the arts, there's no regional theatre in our LTP plan today. Okay, so kia ora tātou, everybody. Okay, so take a seat, and it's in the hands of Sarah Omundson.
Thank you, Sarah. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have quite a long presentation through our long-term plan this morning. Quite a lot of slides. I don't know if you've got a hard copy in front of you, but I'll go through them. They've all been just...
Very good.
Thank you. Thank you and good morning. Excuse my absence for a moment there. You do know that you have half an hour, and if you wish to have questions, I'm sure there'll be a question or two, then that will be included in your inclusive of the half an hour. So it is a half an hour that you've got. Thank you.
And I'll just talk through the slides really quickly and get to the end, and if we want to go back to any, all of our staff here can answer any of your specific questions. You know the faces of our regional council, and I'm assuming you also know our area that we are responsible for. We actually had a question at Western Bay a couple of days ago about the jurisdiction out to sea there, and it was clarified that that relates to our maritime safety requirements. So that's why we go out past those islands. In preparing this new long-term plan, councillors and council spent a really long time thinking about the roadmap of where we are and where we want to be. And in this consultation document, you'll see kind of our plan on a page. That's our roadmap. Clear vision for the future, thriving together, mō te taio, mō ngā tangata, and thinking about how to get there the council has spent a long time on strategic challenges. What is going to affect our ability to achieve our vision? What is going to shape our region, and what do we need to think about? And some key parts of that are the implications of a changing climate, which your council are dealing with as well, how we sustain development across the region when we've got limitations on our natural resources, ensuring Māori participation in council decision making. You've got the Rotorua Te Aroa Lakes strategy group in place, and that's those kinds of co-governance entities are across our region and a critical part of our decision making. We have 4 community outcomes in our new long-term plan. Previously, we had 5, but through that, thinking about those challenges and what we need to deliver, we refocused and looked at what are our core responsibilities, and that's a healthy environment, fresh water for life, safe and resilient communities, and ensuring a vibrant region. Thank you. In that roadmap on page 7 of the consultation document, we've also articulated the way we want to work and telling the community this is the service that you can expect from us. It's about honouring our obligations to Māori, it's delivering value to ratepayers and customers, always looking to innovate and improve, looking to partnerships for our best outcomes, and using robust information, science and technology in making decisions. I'll just talk a little bit about the 4 outcomes that we have set out. The consultation document talks about all of the services and the work that we do currently to deliver on those outcomes, and that's not going to change. We are continuing to do what we have done. In a healthy environment, that includes our planning and our compliance and our education. It also includes all of our on-ground work that we do, our biosecurity programs, protecting biodiversity. And a critical part is the monitoring of the environment to make sure that it's not getting worse. Fresh water for life. It's obviously part of a healthy environment, but we've separated it out as its own outcome given the challenges and the resources going into managing fresh water at the moment. You know that we've got plan changes right across a number of areas for water, Plan Change 9 and allocating the use of water. We have water management areas around the region that we are currently looking at setting limits for both quality and quantity. You're all really familiar with Plan Change 10 here in Rotorua. That's all part of freshwater work that we are doing and will continue to do. But we also do a lot of on-the-ground local solutions to local problems. If there are issues that we know, local streams of water quality in local streams or erosion happening, we will work on the ground to mitigate those. Our safe and resilient communities, that's about natural hazards management, it's about our maritime safety, and we've got harbour masters here on the lake, out on Tauranga Harbour. They also work in our streams to keep people safe. Flood protection work, and all of our civil defence services are under our safe and resilient community outcome. And finally, a vibrant region. Transport, and I'm sure you've got a few questions for Melissa on transport today. Also, our vibrant region includes our economic development work, spatial planning, and also the infrastructure projects that we have in place. So as I said, in those outcomes that are included in our consultation document, we will continue to offer those, we'll continue to do the services. That's what we're doing now. We will continue into the future. But one thing has changed, and that is we're proposing to do more, and some of the things that we currently do are costing more. So a focus of this consultation document is about our budget approach to that changing economic environment. So things cost more. How how much more? We've got a $1.4 billion operating expenditure proposed in this long-term plan over the next 10 years. Increases around passenger transport because we want more buses to more places more frequently, and that costs. We are proposing increased services around our science and monitoring, delivering more comprehensive programs around biosecurity, proposing to borrow costs on our to fund the Capital Works program, and we've also included $500,000 every year for our community engagement funding, and that includes the Environmental Enhancement Fund that some of you might be aware of, that it's a really successful program we've offered over the last 10 years. Capital expenditure, proposing $178 million of capital expenditure over the next 10 years. We have some necessary but very costly flood repairs from last year's cyclone events, $34 million proposed in year 1 and 2, and also flood protection and control works. There's a lot of new and replacement structures that we have to do over the next 2 years as well, which is $38 million proposed for year 1 and 2. How do we fund that? Firstly, we're proposing an increase of 12% to the general rates in year 1 of the long-term plan, then less than 3% in the out years. We have proposed new targeted rates for emergency management and also for public transport. So that is new targeted rates for services in the Western Bay and Whakatane. We are proposing changes to fees and charges, and that's what's being charged for compliance, monitoring and consents. We have the consultation document out for comment at the moment, which we're really encouraging people to engage with as well. And it's really important to note that our substantial quayside dividend keeps rates low. We are forecasting some borrowing, but that's within prudential limits, and potential to use some reserves if new, that 3PIF means third-party infrastructure funding, sorry about that, proposing to use reserves if through this consultation we agree to funding infrastructure projects into the future. So what does that look like in terms of rates? Across the 3 districts, that's just a bird's eye view of the rates forecast, but hopefully the next slide shows you what that means for Rotorua. The top bar there shows our current rates and the out years for the first 3 years of the long-term plan. So there's 5 key consultation topics that are included in this consultation document. That's where we're encouraging people to provide us with information on specific proposals that we have that are impacting on funding. The first is our rivers and drainage flood recovery project. As I said, a lot of repairs required after the 2 cyclones last year. Approximately 500 sites across the region that need work, which has been estimated at $33 million over 3 years. We're planning to do the work and we want to do it as quick as possible. What we are asking the community is how to pay for that. We're proposing to have higher rates in the first 2 years of the long-term plan, but we could also spread that rate increase out over 10 years. So we're really looking for feedback on that. Public transport, as I said, more buses to more places more frequently. In the past, we have funded that in through a variety of grants and rates, and Tauranga and Rotorua paid a targeted rate, and there was also general contribution across the region. What we are looking to is making sure the right people are paying for the service. So what we're proposing to do is to use targeted rates and no regional subsidy. We could also continue the regional subsidy or phase the way we make that change over a couple of years. The third consultation topic is around biosecurity and are we putting the right level of effort into managing our biosecurity risks? Our current approach is to focus on detecting new incursions and looking at controlling low incident pests rather than well-established ones. We've had a lot of community feedback over the years, particularly through our regional pest management plan, saying we want council to do more. So we are proposing to increase resourcing, and what we're proposing equates to about a 2% rates increase to fund that. Our options are that we could maintain the existing status quo, or we could increase services and programs even further. So that would look at some of the pests like woolly nightshade, kiwi fruit, wild ginger, and also providing increased services around advising landowners. The fourth consultation topic is about emergency management and how that's funded. We're not proposing to change the service, but we're proposing to change the way it's funded. We're proposing a single targeted rate for region-wide civil defence services. The alternative is to continue collecting separate regional and local council rates for that. And finally, regional development. We have funded third-party infrastructure in the past. That includes wastewater infrastructure that you're familiar with, and also other infrastructure for economic development. We're proposing to continue funding those projects, but also asking, should we be using debt to fund more projects or not fund any new infrastructure projects at all into the future? So that's the end of a very long presentation. Thank you for your patience. Just to finalise, the consultation's just about to come to an end. It finishes next week. We've got hearings through April and obviously need the plan adopted by the 30th of June. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, now you'll take some questions?
Certainly.
Thank you. That's good. Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you very much for the presentation, and very good presentation you took to providing. The question that I have is around the safe and resilient communities. Pages 20, I was looking through pages 27 and page 32. There are properties around Lake Rotorua that are getting very concerned about, well, especially climate change and storms that we've been having. Flood protection work around, especially around the Nongata Parawai area. The residents there are getting very concerned about their properties. So the question I have is this the right place, or is it through the Te Arawa Lakes Committee that we have to take this issue on concerns that they have with their properties? You know, they were thinking of putting stop banks up and everything, but they're not allowed to do things without getting permission from you guys, I guess.
I think, Councillor, to bring it as part of the LTP, as part of your submission, would be appropriate. And as we all know, it's no secret, the biggest issue for all of us in this area is Lake Okaraka at the moment, which is requiring a tremendous amount of resources and manpower being focused in that area. It's all very much a victim of climate change, as we all know, but that gives little comfort to the residents in those areas with their multi-million-dollar properties, and likewise the properties in your area. But if I can just suggest you make a submission to the LTP and also bring it up to the Te Arawa Lake Strategy Committee, their strategy group, by all means. But no, it's a grave concern to us, and as I said, it's consuming huge amounts of dollars and manpower at the moment, particularly Lake Okaraka.
And especially, say, Lake Rotorua at the moment.
Indeed.
In summer, it's not usually this high.
No. But coupled with this, of course, of the environmental issues, and we've got major issues at Lake Okaraka with regards to the Waitangi stream, because when you're pumping huge volumes of water down that very small stream, that's also a trout spawning stream and a considerable environmental significance. It's a real balancing act to balance the the desperate needs of the people in Lake Okaraka and to balance the environmental needs of the people at Lake Tarawera. But no, good question. We're happy to, we'll certainly take it up.
Thank you. Councillor Kent?
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Referring to page 23, I've got a very similar question to the last presentation we had, and that is, what is the actual increase in rate take that you're expecting to achieve over the first 3 years? Because I see conflicting information here. You're showing an increase in targeted rates of about 30% in year 1. You're showing an increase in general rates of around about 10% and a real percentage increase of 30%. So can you explain that, please, first of all?
Okay, this is Mark Lecomte, the Corporate Performance Program Manager, Councillor, and I'm pretty sure he'll be able to assist you with your question.
So thank you for the question, Councillor. The graph on page 23, which you're referring to, shows our actual amount of both general rates and targeted rates. In terms of, on the left-hand axis, it shows the actual dollar amounts. The right-hand axis refers to the line which shows the percentage amounts. There is, of course, a very high percentage increase in targeted rate proposed early in the year, mainly as a result of those changes to the targeted rate ratios that were discussed in the presentation and also the work required for flood repairs. So the actual dollar figures are increasing from around 51 million to around 55 million to around 58 million in the first 3 years for total rates revenue.
So I repeat my question. What percentage increase in your rate take are you getting in each of the first 3 years, please?
So in the first year, it's approximately a 30% increase. That is between both general and targeted rates. By far the biggest percentage increases in the targeted rate. In the other years, it's approximately 5% and approximately 3%.
So we have 30% and then 5% and 3% compounding in the first 3 years, yet you're also forecasting to double your debt over the 10-year period. And I see here that you also are failing to comply with the Local Authorities Act, which requires you to operate a balanced budget. What is your prudent reason for failing to do so for the first 4 years?
So first of all, the Local Government Act does not require you to actually have a balanced budget. Council may determine that it is prudent to strike an unbalanced budget. The primary reason we have an unbalanced budget is due to the third-party infrastructure funding grants. Those are on our balance sheet, on our expenditure statement as expenditure, since we don't own the asset. That has been reviewed by Audit New Zealand and confirmed to be a prudent approach. The other approach would be, for example, with grants given to things like Rotorua, Rotorua, Scion, etc., that we would rate for the entire amount in the first year, which is not the intent, given that those are projects that give a long-lasting benefit and are more similar to capital works.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then can I just ask, have you even considered whether people in Rotorua can even afford these hikes?
Of course, the clear answer to that question is yes, and we are interested in feedback on any part of the long-term plan through the public submissions.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Gould.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation this morning. In your slide presentation, you mentioned do repairs as soon as possible concerning the storm damage which we had in 2017. I know dollars and manpower is important, but people's lives are important too. So what sort of length of time are you talking about? Are you talking about years or, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? Because some of the damage around this Rotorua district is actually quite severe in a particular area.
So the program on storm damage repairs has been prioritised based on the risk. The highest risk areas, particularly where the risk to loss of life, are being done first, of course. The total work is programmed over a couple of years, and that is mainly due to contractor availability, the ability to get the geotechnical work, the design, the consenting, etc. done.
Mr. Gould, Councillor Gould. Mr. Berryman-Camp.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and yes, welcome. Thank you for your presentation. Fantastic to see you brought the majority of Bay Plenty Regional Council with you. Excellent. I have two questions, actually one for you, and then I think one of them will be actually for our staff. The first question is, obviously we've just had a presentation from Waikato Regional Council, and I'm interested to know what, if any, liaison you've had with the other regional council that this council predominantly works with, to see if there's any alignments or synergies in terms of the LTPs where it's possible to work together. That's my first question. Oh, actually, shall we nail that and then I'll just do the next one?
So in terms of developing the long-term plans, most of the engagement between the regional councils through the regional sector group, our chair is very heavily involved and our chief executive is very heavily involved in discussing the issues across the regional councils.
Okay. Thank you. So, and my second question, I guess, is more for our staff, and as a relatively new member of this committee, I'm just seeking, what's the usual process for this council to be submitting on other councils' LTPs? I must confess I've been predominantly focused on Rotorua Lakes Council's LTP, but there's been, amongst these last two presentations, some big major strategic things that actually I would have thought any submission from Rotorua Lakes Council will come to this committee before it goes on. But I'm unsure of that, and I'm also aware that close-off date for Bay of Plenty Regional Council is Friday? Monday. So what's the normal process for Rotorua Lakes Council to submit to other LTPs, and where does this committee's role sit in that?
Yes, we do submit on other LTPs, and I'm sure that's being worked on right now, but whether or not it comes back, sometimes we do get it coming back, but not always, I understand.
Yeah, through Madam Chair, and it's a very good question, and sometimes it's the challenge of timing around meetings. So what we're currently doing is we're compiling a draft submission to circulate to members of the committee to seek feedback so that we can actually lodge it on the Monday, with a view then that we can just ratify it at a subsequent SPNF meeting, usually in advance of the hearings. So there is a chance to say, actually, there is a couple of things we would like to amend in our submission or change. So it is a case of just trying to make sure we do the best we can against the timing of when our meetings are. So at this stage, because we are due on Monday, we will be looking to circulate it as a draft, seek comments back from the committee, and then issue it on Monday with a caveat of saying if there's anything further to be ratified, it'll come through at the council meeting.
Madam Chair, can I just say, in terms of the LTP, whilst there's a tight timeline with regards submissions, I know Councillor Winters and Councillor Tahana would support me. We do greatly value the close working relationship we have with the Rotorua Lakes Council, and a lot of this material, of course, is discussed in an ongoing capacity and is not transfixed into being locked into the LTP. You know, a lot of these issues can be discussed throughout the course of a 12-month period.
Yes, thank you very much.
Madam Chair,
yes.
If further to that, if we know your submission is coming and if it's a few days late, I don't think that matters to our timeframes either. Happy to accept a late submission.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Winters. I mean, we've been trying to complete our own LTP, as you know, and everybody else, yourselves and Waikato. So we've been hard up against times, but thank you. I know that something is coming from us as well. And as you say, this isn't the only opportunity to discuss some of those significant issues. Yes, thank you, Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, team, for the presentation. It was just around bus transport. Was my question. And when we looked at our LTP, we looked at balancing the funding tools available, debt, rates and fees and charges, and trying to get all three. I don't see any discussion in your options for funding public transport where there's any talk about fees. Was that a consideration at all?
Yes, Melissa.
Okay, Mark. So that was clearly discussed with our councillors through our approach to a revenue and financing policy. We have, of course, with our passenger transport services, a portion received from government grants, from fees and charges, and from general and targeted rates in the past. The government grant percentage had to stay at the same percentage. It was determined to leave the fee and charge component at the same level, in terms of making sure that we continue to drive increased patronage on the buses. The major discussion point and the major proposed change is using increased targeted rates to make sure that the costs for the bus services are borne by the correct region and are more equitable.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart?
Equitability. On page 23, in answer to my colleague's question regarding you're going for more targeted rates, that's accepted. There's been a shifting in the sands of moving more of your revenue collection to targeted rates, but there hasn't been a commensurate reduction in general rates. They are still retaining their level of collection. So if you're going to a high level of targeted rate, surely there should be a commensurate decrease in the general rate, but there isn't. And secondly, it was raised by, I think, Mr. Berryman Kemp and Councillor Maxwell, the ongoing issue of the review of lake levels. That is a huge priority, particularly for people at Lake Rotorua. I mean, the inundation of properties and coming up our roads and the cost to us, not you, us, of your policy decision to increase the level of Lake Rotorua is now coming. I opposed it right from day one, and because on one side of the lake it can be
Questions,
higher.
please.
Yeah, on one side of the lake it can be higher and lower. So when are you going to review the lake levels? And the other thing is that even with doubling your borrowing, expecting a huge increase in return on investments, you are putting the regional council in debt over the 10-year period by another $100 million. And I wondered whether your chief executive officers come before your council and ask. My question is, excuse me, don't interrupt, thank you, Councillor Kumar. I thought you'd be less ruder than you are.
Yes,
I just wondered whether your chief executive officer had signalled to your, this is a question, if your chief executive officer had signalled to the council.
Councillor Maxwell, you should know better, please.
That there is an organisational review of how the regional council does business. I just wondered whether that had been signalled as well. Because everyone's been going through reviews.
Well, I think we've answered lake levels.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing. Councillor Winters, you might.
Yeah, I mean, Charles, you talked about our change in policy of lake levels. We haven't changed our policy in lake levels of Lake Rotorua. It's just we've had far more rain. These weather bombs are just so unpredictable. The Kaituna River is only the one plug hole, and we manage the gates accordingly. And at the moment, they've been open for so many days this year. It's unbelievable. But there's only one plug hole down Lake Rotorua. It's not a change in policy of lake levels. We've just been inundated with rainfalls.
Yes.
8 years. I don't know why. And I opposed it then, and I think we're now bearing the fruit of that. But I agree with you, Mr. Councillor Winters, the weir and the gates at the Okere Falls have been wide open for months, and yet there's been very little change because, as you say, the water.
Well, I think it's a matter of fact of climate change, Councillor Stewart, and we're getting into a new normal, and we have to change the way we operate sooner rather than later. So
yes, I think you're right with that expression, Councillor Winters. That is, we are getting into a new normal, and that will change everything and our response. And thank you for that. Your Worship.
Thank you for coming, and also thank you for the contribution to Rotorua, and consideration of Tarawera. That's very big for our community. I suppose we get back to this issue about fair share, and we keep hearing about your stormwater and really climate change effects and Edgecombe and Matata. We have stormwater issues too that we need to work through with you, and I see that you will be working on that with us, and appreciate that. The other that I find quite strange is this investment in the Tauranga tertiary campus of 15 million, and yet for us we still sort of haven't had anything, and I know you were ready for this. And for us, it's very much Tino Road and also the Freshwater Centre of Excellence that we heard from Waikato Regional Council. They're keen to engage with us on. So I think those are two issues that are quite a burning platform for us. And the other small one is your 2.2% for biosecurity. Please help with the catfish incursion. We are all hands to the mill on that one.
So if I could speak to the Tauranga Tertiary Campus part first, through the, I believe it was a 2012 to 2022 long-term plan, the Bay Plenty Regional Council established the Regional Infrastructure Fund, which was the then $40 million for economic development projects. That was, those funds were allocated through a fully contestable funding process, an independent panel led by the chair of the Chief Executive of Quayside Holdings to do due diligence on all the applications received and funding decisions made. Those funds were allocated on the best regional outcome basis. So the $15 million allocated for the Tauranga Tertiary Campus was through a full application review decision process. The outcome for Rotorua specifically on that was the Scion Innovation Hub, which has the funding allocated towards it, and I believe Scion are due to be making a public announcement later in April to advise further on their progress with that.
Can I just support the officers on that? You know, the process was incredibly transparent, but sadly for Rotorua, the only project that floated to the surface was the Scion project. So, you know,
yes. New project, other than us submitting, we will submit to get funding consideration for major infrastructure projects through the new Regional Development Fund.
So with that, as part of our long-term consultation and our financial and other policies, there's a draft third-party infrastructure funding policy and application form. I've made sure that some of your staff in the infrastructure area are directly aware of that policy and the application process to follow.
Thank you.
Thank you. And is that, those applications, are they looked at in-house or do you have external people sitting there to evaluate them? Objectivity, obviously.
So it is a case-by-case basis. In general principle, we do not want to make rushed decisions around those things. So while we may make an initial funding allocation, those often come with some conditions in terms of due diligence, in terms of business case, in terms of performance targets to be met over time. So there's often an initial analysis and more due diligence throughout a contractual approach to delivery. For example, if I look at the Opotiki Harbour Transformation Project, another one of the Regional Infrastructure Fund projects, that has gone through a tremendous amount of business casing, validation, and central government involvement as well. So it's not just a one application and then a cheque is paid. It is a full due diligence process over time.
Thank you. Ms Mohi?
Kia ora koutou, nā kaunihira o te toi moana. I just wanted to make a point. I was just listening to the different, before I start my questions, the different rush that I hear staff and our councillors about responding to the long-term regional councils and the Waikato regional councils, long-term plans, and you know this is a body with a full machine of support behind it, and so it makes me quite sad, I guess, for our tangata whenua who are also struggling to respond to not just the regional long-term plans, the district council long-term plans. We've got the plan change going on as well, and so I just wanted to highlight that is a very real issue for our people. And so if there's bodies such as this with huge mechanisms behind it to respond to struggle, you know, spare a thought for our tangata whenua, our treaty partners. But getting to the questions, you talked about the bus route, the bus transport system. Currently the bus route doesn't go beyond Notaha. Not too sure how far it goes around the east side, but there's no connecting route at all. I do recall making a verbal submission at one of the komiti Māori hui out at Ōwhata about a year or two ago, or the last time this consultation round went out. I guess it didn't go anywhere because we still don't get a bus to Awahau, Hamurana. And so I just wanted to put that out there again. And I think it would be great idea just to have, even if it was a couple of times a day, around the route, around the lake route, bus route for the workers in the morning, getting home in the evening. As a tourist, when I'm overseas, that's the first thing I do is get on a bus and just roam and get my bearings. So just thought I'd put that out there. And just hopefully there's some thought towards that. And then other thing is, we're all very clear that climate change is having a huge impact on everyone. And I hear in the kōrero this morning, there was a big focus on repairs. I guess my question is, what's happening in terms of actually, rather than repairing to the status quo, the responding in terms of the change of how we do deal with these infrastructure changes, bigger culverts, bigger this, bigger that. I don't know if that's the answer. Are we looking at different, how we're living, how we're interacting with our environment, the flood drainage schemes? I just think it's time we start changing the way we think about how we respond to these issues. It's not, I was at a regional council hearing last week, we were talking about 500-year storms. That's a scary thought. We get a 100-year storm nearly every other week. So it's just something that I just wanted to put it there in terms of, the bigger picture going on in terms of changing how we're, building infrastructure, how we're building homes, how we're building on the coastlines and around the lakes. And so that was all really. Kia ora.
Chairman, can I just reassure Mrs Mohi that in terms of engagement with tangata whenua, we do have the standing committee Māori committee, and this whole presentation in much greater detail was taken to the last hui, which happened to be at Pukahina. So these are rotated all around the region, but no, tangata whenua are fully engaged at all levels, as we know, and we have the 3 councillors sitting at our table. But of interest to you and to Councillor Maxwell, I think you were at Waitati for the committee Māori meeting that was out at Waitati, and I think it was Rotorua Clark who put the challenge to us to get a full audit and appraisal done of all the streams flowing in to Rotorua, because there were concerns about sediment and build-up and degradation of flowing streams. This full audit has been done, and it is available, and it was presented to tangata whenua at the last committee Māori meeting at Pukahina. So that is out there, and that's, I think, just highlights our responsiveness. It took a little bit longer than what we'd anticipated, but that was a call from tangata whenua with regards to their concerns with the degradation of the streams flowing into Lake Rotorua. So that has been done, and it's available to be.
Thank you.
And a bus to Awaho, promise me, I'll do that for you in the election year, Councillor. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Thurston, and I am aware that many of our entities, Māori entities, actually prioritise the things that they really want to be heard on and get involved in, because as Ms Mohi has said, they don't have the resources, so they're quite specific about the areas that they want to address and bring to your attention. I am going to call this discussion to a close now. And thank you very much for coming over and for presenting and giving us an opportunity to hear your long-term plan. Yes, certainly.
The committee, when I was talking about Tenai Road, I was not asking for funding support. I was asking for councillor support when we are looking at the regional transport committee priorities. We're number 12 on the regional priority list, so we need councillor support.
The year, and we greatly value it from our side. So kia ora tātou.
Thank you. Thank you very much to councillors and also to your staff for coming over this morning. Thank you. Kia ora.
back in November. Completed. It took several months. The DN full of various equipment of the museum cafe. Of planning to remove that, so we had to wait for engineers' reports on the strength of the larger summer sculptures. Some of those crated on site, carefully off, and now are safely stored in the off. The first time. Finalising over some estimates of the cost of oh, whoops, too far. Right, so weight, given that the roof currently weighs 164 tonnes as it is. We've the US, where they have a similar our environment. The next picture is the one when I first saw this, sort of scared me a bit, but this is the main atrium, and this shows you the level of steel required to strengthen the atrium up to about 80%. So you can see it's quite significant. And our challenge here is about how we actually get this steel in place without, really destroying more of the heritage fabric or trying to reduce our risk in terms of damage to heritage fabric. So just to give you an idea of some of the challenges around this. So if you look at the pink spaces in the centre that sort of represents the mezzanine floor. This requires steel to be inserted into the floor. It can be done in either two ways. Either you remove the top of the floor, access the steel that way, which means that you raise the floor by about 100 mil. If we do that, then all the doorways, the heritage doorways, all need to be lifted by 100 mil around the atrium. The logical choice is to access that steel into that floor from below, which means those that are familiar with the building, the tongue and grooves ceiling that sits around the atrium in that space, each nail will need to be drilled out, and you take each paling out, numbered, secured, and then once all that's out, then you start putting the steel in and putting it back in. And this is part of the reason why the QS is taking so long. It's not so much about the steel, it's the methodology of getting the steel into the building. The other part that I think is really important here is the side walls, so those tall walls. The access for steel for those, particularly on the southern wing, is fortunately we have a false wall where the southern wing extension sits. That wall will be able to be removed, and we'll be able to access the steel on the outside of the building that you up until you get to the exterior part. And then it's bolted through with large plates that actually prevent large chunks of the pumice concrete from falling in on visitors in the event of a seismic event. This is the, hang on, I've got to check. They're very similar. It's the north, I think.
Where's the north?
No, that's. Okay, it might be around the wrong way. So the north wing here, so the strengthening in this place is pretty much those primary walls. So each of the dormer windows, each side of those is really the key walls for strengthening in the museum, and they run pretty much down the whole building. So the challenge here is, once again, is accessing, may have to be rebaiting or bolting these walls and then putting a screen plaster over the top of them, hiding them. In the cafe area, the diaphragm in the cafe area, and some of you may remember there was a mezzanine floor in the cafe area some years ago. When they removed that, they actually removed the strength from that diaphragm. So steel need to go back into that area, and the possibility of the mezzanine floor going back into the cafe space would actually be quite cool, because you can actually get some pretty nice views out of the top windows there of Government Gardens. But once again, it's a very painstakingly slow process as the QS works through methodology of how to get it in and out. This is the southern wing. So the southern wing has thrown up a few surprises for us. So obviously this was constructed in 2011. And the key issues here are all those blue structural lines, which are basically the steel strengthening that needs to go in here to bring this building back up to 100%. Key issue here is connections to the floor plate or the concrete plate within those gallery spaces. So it's what they call currently a brittle connection, so in any movement it's likely to snap. And these are obviously changes in the building code since Christchurch. So this was designed pre-Christchurch, was 100% compliant at the time. But of course, the learnings from Christchurch have meant now that we need to relook at this. While we're here and we're doing the replacement of the roof to a lightweight roof structure, it actually makes sense to do this work, because this will bring the southern wing back up to 100% NBS. The last part there is the gallery where Pukaki currently sits, and that's in the insertion of some additional strengthening above the strengthening that's already there, and that's really just to tie those roof spaces in. The key issue why this has taken so long, we have currently 3 independent buildings. There's there's obviously the Heritage Building from 1908, the extension of 2008, and the extension of 2011 are all independent buildings. So in a likely event, they act independently, and so they work against each other. So what this design does is bring the building together as one, and so that in the event the whole building will move together, therefore reducing the risk. So the MBS ratings of the north extension and southern will be around 100%. I think we're aiming at about 80 plus for the heritage part. Progress from here. So this just sort of gives you an indication of where we are in terms of timelines. So currently, excuse me, I can't see that. Probably. So currently, we've completed seismic strengthening design is complete. We're working through the seismic strengthening design and compliance requirements. So there are additional fire egress required in the new build to be compliant. There's additional toilets and all those sorts of things. They have ongoing replications for us because of the positive air pressure in the museum. So the more the more doors we put in, the higher rate of air we need to pump in to keep the sulphur out. So it does have some implications. Over this next little while, certainly over the next couple of months, we'll start to see some estimates from the QS, and then the develop design phase, and that really brings us sort of towards the end of this year and possibly early next year, where we'll be in a position to have a detailed design, final costings, and then construction will probably commence, and I think in the first half of next year, but probably towards the middle of, or the latter part of that half.
Thank you, Stuart. Very comprehensive. I know there'll be some questions. Councillor Donaldson, then Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Stuart. Just a question. Once you get to construction commencing, is there any estimate how long construction might take?
Look, potentially this is a 2-year build, I think. I'm not sure whether we can do it any quicker than that. We can potentially we could do it in phases where we may be able to open up part of the building at some point, but it's 2 years. I've just been on a recent visit to Hastings Opera House and their earthquake strengthening there. Theirs is a similar sort of product, and it's a 2-year build.
Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, Stuart, I just wondered when we'll be in the position to get a handle on costs in terms of partnering with government, Quayside Holdings at Regional Council, of course they got plenty, and getting some partnership money to fund this because of its regional significance. I mean, if Hamilton get a regional theatre, we can get a regional museum of national significance.
Right, so we've already had discussions with a number of funders with the Shrimpack project, and we've raised the issue of the museum at the same time. We've met with the Ministry of Heritage and Culture. They're directing us, because they have no funds currently, and our last port of call, but they're directing us significantly to the Regional Economic Development Fund. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Berriman-Kim?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the report. My question is, I've recently been to a couple of buildings where actually they've embraced the earthquake strengthening and it's exposed. Has that been considered?
Yes,
sorry, it's exposed because in those particular buildings it was more cost effective, but also it shows the development of the building as it goes through its life cycle. So I was just wondering if that had been considered.
Yeah, look, absolutely. There's a couple of reasons. One is that it does tell the story or the next phase of that building's life in terms of strengthening. One is that the learnings we got from Christchurch is that if people see the exposed steel in there, it gives them a degree of comfort that they're in a safe building as well. They know that it could be potentially a building that's been affected. So it does give people some security.
Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Stuart. I now know why they demolish 3/4 of historic buildings and leave just the facades and put new buildings behind. If you're going to take the roof off and put a new roof on, and in reality, 90% of the attraction of the building to visitors is photographs taken from the front, would that not be an option that could perhaps be quicker, cheaper and better, more beneficial in the long run, i.e. maintain the facade, put the new roof on so it looks identical from the front, but actually have a new building behind it?
Councillor, that was one of the options that we looked at initially. Obviously, it's a Category 1 heritage building, and obviously we would need to seek approval for that sort of one of the option. But I think it's been part of Rotorua's heritage for such a long time. It has many connections with this community. If the staircases and in particular, Tudor Towers, many people in this room met their partners' wives, girlfriends on those stairs. And it's been many things to this community over time. you know. And if you go back even further, you know, convalescent soldiers in World War I, World War II, they're all connected to that building. And yes, it is easy to throw that away and have something that may be more fit for purpose behind it, but that we lose that part of our heritage, and that would be a shame.
Thank you. Councillor Thurston, you had a question, was it?
Do you need a resolution for an interested member of the public to open up?
I think we will. I think we will allow. Thank you.
But I just commend you as the city fathers, and I know it's PC to say city mothers, to this project, because this project to me is a project of national significance. And I just remind us all that in 1906, this was the government of the days and the first New Zealand government's commitment to tourism in New Zealand. And we know they put an astronomical sum of £15,000 into this project. There was a budget blowout. That's why we got a bugger's muddle with only the middle part and not the north and south wing. So I just commend you, and I know I speak for, I would like to think everyone in this community. I think it's the most phenomenal building. It's of national importance, it's of national significance, and you've only got to read the media and social media to know how many people are behind you. You know, that the community is totally committed to this as a project, and I just think it's wonderful that you're going to kickstart it, and the sooner it's the old ladies back up on their legs again, I don't know that's sexist, the better we'll all be off. And I think it's a major tourism attraction for New Zealand and a building of huge national significance. Kia kaha, well done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Sorry, Councillor
Thurston.
Thank you. Your Worship.
And I'm pleased to see this today, and can we tell other members that we haven't seen it before now? So thank you for bringing it to us. It reminds me of when we wanted to move quickly, get it done, get it sorted, how complex it is. Just wanting to add that when we went to the Ministry for Arts, Culture and Heritage with Brett Marvelly, who's here, about Howard Morrison, we were actually told this has to be restored. So we've got to find a way. And when it was we, it's the community, the Crown, and community funding like we did for both wings. And I think now I see we've got to realise it can be done. That's what you're telling us today. We'll get clearer to the costs, but also just wait until we can get it done properly. And I'm relieved to see it. You know, you could have bought the option that actually it's too hard, and you haven't, so you keep the flame alive on it. Thank you for that. And I look forward to the response from the community in the long-term plan.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Stewart and member of the public. Well, thank you for that. And chair of the trust, and all the work they've already put into it up to now. The public have got this figure at the moment, and many are talking to us about 32 million. Now, you said there's still costings further down the road. So what can we say about the 32 million? That's a good estimate, is it?
Yeah, I think it'll be close. We're not in a position to be that accurate at this point, Councillor Maxwell. There's still, as I explained, in terms of the complexities of accessing of steel into the structures and how we actually maintain as much of the heritage fabric as possible is really the cost bit. We know roughly what the steel's probably going to be now, but how we get it in and the methodology and the time that it's going to take. If you think about that, taking each one of those palings out of the roof space, and it's going to take weeks and weeks and weeks. If you were at home, you'd be ripping it open, put another piece of ply up. It would be that simple, but it's quite complex, and I couldn't put a figure on it right now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a question that I'd like to ask Stewart, and thank you for that presentation and giving us an update. Is there any reason why we can't take the fencing down? The only reason I ask that is that just recently there have been 2 retired engineers in Rotorua who have spoken to me and said it's not necessary. Now, that's what they say. We're talking about keeping people safe in that, and it really is, as somebody mentioned, it's about the photos, and it's quite unsightly with that. But, is it really necessary? You must have good advice from engineers that it is, but there's an opposing view out there.
Yes, so it's the engineers that gave us the advice that that's where the fencing should go. In particular, the main atrium is obviously the highest risk area, given that it's only 19% MBS. And you'll also be aware of the samples, those samples we brought around in terms of pumice concrete only. So I know it's unlikely that there would be an event, but we don't allow public in the building. And I think to allow tourists to walk up to the building is a risk.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for that update this morning. Thank you, Stuart. So we'll continue with item 6 of our agenda, and that's the confirmation of minutes. This was our Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting held on the 8th of February. Are there any amendments to... Oh, sorry, I'll just put that first. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please, for that the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of February 2018 be confirmed as true and correct? Thank you, Councillor Gould. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Any amendments or changes? Carl, thank you very much. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you. Carried. On to our staff reports now. Recommendation 2, the Kingsley Drive Reserve, End Reserve approval to lease. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please, that the report be received? Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Thank you, Mr. Berryman-Kemp. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Thank you. Carried. Good morning, Rob and Robert and Rob. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We know you've had a fairly long morning, and I think this first paper is relatively self-explanatory, so I'd like it to be taken as read. We have been through a public submission process on this and received some pretty good feedback. We have had some concerns we think we've been able to address, so happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Tapsell.
Yes, thank you. I just had a question regarding the lease and whether there'll be a clause in there restricting the number of hives that will be available. And I only asked that because of the concern that came up in one of the submissions of a family that lives nearby that has allergies to bees. Now, I think it's a very serious consideration we should take for the safety of our residents and also the family. And I understand and here you've explained why it shouldn't be too much of a risk, but I think any risk is worth looking over. So is there going to be a restriction on how many hives they can have there?
They have told us that they're only seeking to have 2 to 3 hives there. I'm not sure whether we have that as an absolute condition, but we could create that. Sorry?
We haven't written the lease yet.
No, we haven't prepared the lease yet, but we can reflect that to meet that limit.
Mr. Berryman-Kemp?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. And in fact, my question applies to this report and also to the next one as well.
Yes.
Thank you for the reports, and I understand them, and that's all fine. But one component that I found was missing that I think was interesting from a te tātou perspective was some background in the reports as to how the council came upon these reserves, how it came upon the land. Are there any, for instance, obviously, if it was gifted land, then are there any conditions under that, and what consultation is required under that process? Because I'm unable to tell with the 2 reports where the land is sourced from, I'm unable to tell what the impact from Māori is of these decisions. So I was wondering if you could illuminate me a wee bit on that, please.
Do you have information? No, it's a good question, and I can't answer the origin of the Kingsley Road land. I would expect, given the fact that it's tacked onto the end of the subdivision, that it is a lot that was became as part of a development contribution when that land was subdivided by the previous owner, and so a proportion of those lots or the value of that subdivision needs to be put aside for reserve space. So that would be my assumption, looking at how it is located on the map and the topography of the area.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, thank you for that answer, and I get that. But I guess just as a supplementary to that, can I request in future reports, when we're considering the use of lands, not just the disposal of, but the use of lands within the report itself, there is a section that outlines where the land was sourced from, so that we can have some sort of consideration as to what's required in that.
I think that's a point well made, actually. So we actually know how it was acquired and the likely impacts. Thank you very much for that. Councillor Gould.
Madam Chair, thank you for your report. I noticed in your report you've got 144 members of the Honey Bee Club. How many hives are going to be put there, and have the residents been notified that there could be an increase in bees? Because sometimes some children can be allergic to bee stings, and you've also got the trailer park just the other side of the reserve, which may affect some people there that I don't know.
Councillor Gould, I think part of your question was just answered a little while ago, so perhaps we just move to the second part of that, which is probably the trailer park then and other residents.
All the residents within 500 metres of the site were notified by a mail drop with the intention to whether they wanted to submit. We did receive submissions from that and also from the website, the council's website. I'm not aware that we got one specifically from the trailer park. No. And there are 2 to 3 hives proposed for this site, but there are around another 7 hives on the adjoining land block that is in the area. So there are a number of private hives generally in that area as well.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Just a supplementary question on the number of hives, because while I acknowledge there are people with allergies, bees are incredibly important for our environment. And I had a neighbour in Selwyn Road who had at least three hives on his residential section. So do we have a policy on the limits to beehives in the urban area?
That's a very good question.
Through you, Madam Chair, I believe the animal control people do have a policy and direction around beehives in an urban area. It's all down to the distance they are from the boundary of the property that's keeping the hives.
A bit like chooks.
Yeah.
Stuart?
Yeah, Madam Chair, this subdivision, just to give you a bit of history, was part of the Johnny Lepper subdivision, and there were 5 lots there, and this was as a provision of that subdivision to provide this this reserve there. I'm quite comfortable with the recommendations. Reality is the adjoining properties can put their zoned rural, residential or rural. They can put 10, 20, 30 beehives there. The fact that this is a small portion of that rural residential farm lifestyle environment, yeah, I hear what Councillor Tapsell said. Yeah, I'm allergic to wasps, but I have no control over eliminating wasps. But I think it's indicative. I mean, I sold a property just recently in an urban area. They had 3 hives, high-producing hives in a residential area. So I don't see it being a major problem.
Thank you.
I support the recommendation. In fact, I'm happy to move it.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Just a few more councillors. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was actually going to move it, but I'm quite happy to second it.
Thank you. Ms Mohi.
Kia ora, kōrua. Just in terms of your public seeking of public submissions and with the surrounding neighbours, just wondering if you made any contact with the local hapu, Ngāti Tura Tanaka, or perhaps the Ngata end of the Ngāti Whakaue at all?
I'm not familiar directly, but we know Jenny Rinnie through comms did make some contact with iwi groups in the area. I don't know the detail whether it was those particular groups, and I can find out for you.
Kia ora, through you, Madam Chair. I just wonder, is that part of the consultation process at all, or was that more of a complementary process to do that?
It's part of the process. Yep.
Kia ora.
Yeah, I think it does mean bearing in mind now that we do have we need to extend our reach in terms of consulting and advising and sharing information more now. So thank you for that, Ms Mohi, for reminding us about that. Your Worship?
just want to speak in support of the recommendation. Many clubs are looking for places to go, and as more and more of our prime land is being taken for development and growth, some of these clubs have got nowhere to go, and I think this is great that you've worked with the Honeybee Club to find a place that suits an activity that is a community development initiative. So I think it's a great initiative, fits with our sustainability strategy, and I am 100% behind this.
Councillor Kent, do you have another? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to take this opportunity, since I've seconded the motion, because I support it, to just raise an issue that was raised with me just recently, since we are being publicly streamed. People may not be aware that if you put bait out for wasps, you can actually very easily kill beehives completely, and one in Brunswick has just been totally annihilated by people just trying to kill wasps. There are ways of killing wasps without using a sugar-based bait, which is what the bees go for. So I just raised that issue for public awareness.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to put the motion now that the committee recommends to council that leasing be permitted on the Kingsley Drive Reserve, End Reserve. We have a mover and a second. It's been moved by Councillor Stewart, seconded by Councillor Kent. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried. Thank you. Recommendation 3, the Alexander Road Reserve, public consultation on change of reserve purpose. I'd like to call for a mover and a seconder, please, that the report be received. Thank you, Councillor Gould. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. That the report, Alexander Road Reserve, public consultation on change of reserve purpose be received. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary? Thank you. Carried. So, Rob, you're doing this one as well? And I think Henry was doing this too. No, both. Thank you. Well, you remain there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, I'll let Robbie take the lead on this one. He's more familiar with the designation change process that's required.
Robbie.
Through you, Madam Chair. This is basically the first step in amending the reserve designation. So it was previously Recreation Reserve. It got amended earlier in, late 1998 to be Local Purpose Play Centre Reserve. Now there is a call for it to be repurposed to a Local Purpose Reserve Community Reserve, which will enable the use of the now derelict or defunct building that's located on the reserve as a community centre for the Lake Tarawera community. We are expecting quite a robust community consultation process, and that we are aware that there are areas of the community that are against a community centre being out at Lake Tarawera. And basically the consultation will take 1 month and open to submissions, and those will be brought back to the council similar to the previous report for the leasing.
I'll second.
Thank you. It is, yes. Thank you. Your Worship wanted to have...
yes, I did just want to speak. I think this is great. When the play centre was defunct, at Tarawera, they've been looking for a place, and they've been asking for a hall, and they've actually got the play centre. And I want to congratulate Fred Stevens, who was quite fantastic in his support of this. Of course, it will have those that don't approve because of the costs that the community may have to bear. But I think it's great. It'll give them a space. When they had their AGM this year, it was packed and we oozed out into the veranda. It wasn't big enough. So it shows, 4 issues, and that was more the sewage scheme. It was packed out, and they need a community space. So I certainly support this going out to the wider community.
To your Worship, Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Robbie, isn't this what's being proposed here exactly how the Lake Okaraka Community Hall operates quite successfully with a play centre and community use?
It's a little bit different in that there won't be a play centre. Yeah. So the play centre closed due to low numbers. Apparently they all decided that the normal play centre was the place to be. So they would bring their kids in from Tarawera.
But there'd be nothing to stop a play centre operating in it in the future?
No, the community designation means community.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to put that motion that the committee recommends to council that public consultation be undertaken seeking the community's views on changing a portion of Alexander Road Reserve from local purpose play centre reserve to local purpose community reserve pursuant to the Reserves Act 1977. It's been moved by Councillor Stewart, seconded by Her Worship. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Thank you. Now, there were, before we go into, we move to exclude the public into that part of our meeting, there were a few questions asked this morning. So I'm going to ask the, we can discuss those or have a bit of an update, I think, on those two issues. I think one was about legal costs that you put, Councillor Stewart, and the other one was about a roundabout. Oh, the Hemel Gorge ones, that's right, sorry. Oh, yes, and freedom camping. Bring it on. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'll hand it up to Jeff. Thank you.
So through the chair, I think with regards to the legal costs, I understand there were two parts to the question. The first pertaining to costs with regards to the challenge to the last election by Mr McPherson, and then the second pertaining to cost recovery with regards to defamation proceedings. So with regards to the first, there is a legally enforceable agreement with Mr McPherson with regards to the matter pertaining to the challenge to the election. That includes a confidentiality clause, which I am not therefore able to make comment on. With regards to the defamation allegations that were put, what occurred there was that these were picked up and Mr McPherson was challenged on the accuracy of the comments that were made. He subsequently removed the posts and also posted a retraction and apology for the comments that were made. This matter therefore didn't go into a court environment and no costs were recovered.
I'll respond to that.
Certainly.
I endorse your comments regarding there was a confidentiality agreement. However, I don't expect you to comment, but maybe the chair could comment. Surely that confidentiality arrangement has been breached by the comments in the Rotorua Review yesterday. Am I on the wrong tack, or, I mean, someone's now who's party to a confidentiality agreement now going public on the matter?
Well, I think to a certain extent I agree with you, Councillor Stewart, but I don't believe that that gives us any licence to do likewise. So I think I would caution us in this regard that we don't have to follow suit. We know the conditions that were set in terms of yes. So I'd like to think that we can just honour that, if that's the word for it, and ensure that we're not putting ourselves at risk. Yes.
Through the chair, look, all I can say on that matter is that we are certainly reviewing all comments made at this point and are actually providing those to our legal advisors.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
And if through the chair, if I can pass to Stavros to make some comments with regards to the Hemel roundabout.
Thank you. Yes, if you'd like to come forward. Thank you, Stavros. It is coming in for a bit of attention, isn't it? Thank you.
Morning, Madam Chair.
Good morning.
Yes, a couple of things I want to say about the roundabout at Hemo intersection is that work is still ongoing. There are apparent delays in the movement of some of the traffic, especially in the hours between 8:30 and 9:30. And one of the primary reasons for that is that the Mokoia Drive, right and in from Old Harbour or towards the Polytech, is still not open because there are some asbestos pipes to be removed by the contractors on site there too. And the traffic that goes to the Polytech has to go around the roundabouts between 8:30 and 9:30, which coincides with the opening of the of the school, and that causes excessive demand on the roundabout. Now all these works are scheduled to finish by the end of this month. They're about 9 months late. The contract was meant to finish in July last year, but for a whole variety of reasons that has not finished. However, I also wanted to note another thing for that intersection. The primary purpose of improving that intersection, it was not so much about the traffic efficiency, but traffic safety. That intersection had one, if not one of the highest, but certainly among the highest crash rates, in the country. So therefore, to some degree, there will always going to be an element of balance between the safety of the movement of traffic and the efficiency of the traffic. But the delays experienced occasionally over the last couple of months, especially with the Polytech opening, is the fact that the traffic that goes to the Polytech goes around the roundabout to turn in, it cannot turn right from Old Tapa Road at this point in time.
Yes, I don't know whether that's a good. Oh well, I'll leave it for somebody else first. Councillor Kidd. Yes, I did.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, my question is why the roundabout wasn't designed with slip lanes? Because that would have resolved the problem overnight.
I suppose, like everything else, it's always going to be a balance of costs, and what you're trying to achieve there too. That roundabout cost about $10 million to NZTA, and slip lanes, will require a lot more land acquisition to be done, and probably for those of you who are not entirely aware of, the land to the south and to the north of that roundabout is not really readily available. So NZTA had to operate inside a limited floor space or floor plan, for the roundabout. And again, the primary consideration of that intersection there has been traffic safety. But NZTA have always asserted, and they stick to the point that the intersection will have CCTV cameras and Bluetooth monitors, and they will always prepare to adjust, issues if they need to be adjusted.
Thank you. Further questions? Yes. I think that while it primarily was to look at safety or to take safety into consideration, I think that safety could be a compromise now because it's not very efficient. So, I can hear you say it needs to have balance, it needs to be balanced, but I don't know whether if we're not actually causing a safety issue there with people getting frustrated, people not seeing any noticeable improvement, which they had all hoped for after the work was completed. So will NZTA actually review how the safety issue, what obviously it was designed for, and then the efficiency, will they actually review it and see, or make some changes if necessary?
Well, I suppose like any other major capital project, there is pre-construction audit and post-construction safety and operational audit. The expectation for good practice is that when the roundabout is completed at the end of the month or early April, there will be a period of detailed monitoring and assessment of the function of that intersection, both from a safety perspective and traffic perspective. I just want to sort of note something that I think just early December, late November, early December last year, we had a number of companies, especially companies who are operating trucks, that came to us and they raised the issue of some delays again. Now, and again, the reason was the same, but the right turn from Old Tapa Road into Mokoia was open temporarily, although not completed, and that eliminated the problem until recently. The problem resurfaced again recently when the asbestos pipe had to be removed from Mokoia. I expect that when that issue has been resolved, then the queues that experience at the moment will either going to disappear or will be significantly minimized.
Thank you. Mr. Berryman-Kemp.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Steph, I was just thinking about your last answer regarding the post-construction audit. My understanding is that for some NZTA contracts, there's a requirement within the contract that there's a my understanding is that there's a financial impact if the road toll or safety stats don't improve, and I'm wondering if you know if that's been applied in this case. And I'm aware that my understanding is that for some roads, the contractors are actually remunerated in terms of how it impacts on the road safety stats. So I'm wondering if you know if that's in this case.
Mr. Berryman, I think those kind of KPIs apply to projects where they are designed, built and operate by a contractor. Contract like this on Hemo Gorge was designed by NZTA or their agents and was tendered to contractor, so the contractor would not be liable for executing the design that was given to them. But NZTA have to meet their business case KPIs and make sure that the post-construction period is audited and verified as correct, in line with their initial assessments. So I would expect to see the post-construction safety and operational audit to indicate how close is matching their objectives.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's a pretty lively discussion at the Mamaku LTP engagement meeting last night around safety improvements for the intersection at State Highway 5 Maraeroa Road, and mooted there was a roundabout that also takes into account Rotorua Road. I think what we need to remember with this Hemo roundabout is it's early days yet. As Stavros has said, there's still work to be done on the Toiho Mai entranceway, which will alleviate some pressure. But also what was a T intersection now takes into account also the safe entry and exit from Te Puia, which is undergoing significant expansion, and they're getting the likes of 3,000 tourists through that facility in one weekend. So it's coping with a lot more, and it has made big improvements in safety, not only for motorists, but significantly for walkers and cyclists. I think a little bit of patience and delay is a small sacrifice to make for big advancements in safety.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Well put. Well, thank you for that discussion. And thank you for that. And we'll move now to the Freedom Campus update there.
Just very quickly, it was great to be invited with 31 mayors down to meet the Minister, who didn't want to just hear the problems of the country, but looked more for solutions. But the one thing we learnt was that we have a consistently inconsistent way of applying the Freedom Camping Act around the country. 70% of councils have a bylaw, but really they don't have the tools and capacity to prosecute, which is a $200 fine, because they've gone by the time they find the Freedom Camper. And so that was an issue. The other was the name of the act, which is called Freedom Camping. It was actually brought in after the Rugby World Cup quite quickly, or before, because we knew that we had the Barmy Army on the road. And so this was the first approach. There's a need to get the whole act reviewed. They're talking more about responsible camping or managed camping, which is much more Rotorua's approach. I was well briefed by Rob Pitcairnley and Michelle from the tourism perspective. There's great confusion about the definition. Are we talking about just hunters and recreational users who pull up in their hunting truck, or are we talking about family campers, non-self-contained or fully contained? So they need to be quite clearly defined. Then we looked at rules, regulation and licensing, and there's a little bit of general agreement that the non-self-contained might have to move to licensing, so that they may have to only go to designated areas, but that's still all up in the air. There's a need for nationally consistent signage, and there's a need for digital pathway finding on apps and for people who rent camper vans. And so there was agreement that would set up a working party with broad interests on the working party: DOC, Community Board, NZTIA, holiday parks, and a mix of rural, provincial and metro. So that working party will be being established right now. And just to let you know, Zone 5 is having a meeting in Nelson in April about freedom camping. So if anyone wants to go down to Nelson, kei te pai. So that's where we're at. Great that we got listened to and set up a working party. And can I remind councillors that we were part of the working party for dogs, and the latest draft of amendments under the previous government about dogs, and Rotorua was quite at the forefront of that, and changes came about as a result of that. So a working party is the best approach.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Stewart.
When they talked about defining the different groups, I mean, last night at the end of Stembridge Road, there were 6 what we call freedom campers. I wasn't there to find out whether they were self-contained or they weren't. We've had problems at Hamarana, although Rob and the team have sort of got on top of that problem with the locals. So what the general concern, I don't know what it was at Mamaku, Dave, if they mentioned it up there, but is the non-self-contained and what they're doing with their ablutions.
That's right.
And also opportunities for the ones with ablution, with self-contained ablutions, where they can dispose of that. Yeah. So
that's all part of the review.
Okay.
Yeah. So our sentiments were well captured and will be addressed as part of the review.
Okay.
Thank you very much, councillors. Now we do need to move into public excluded. We're doing this to consider a confidential report regarding recruitment to the position of alternate local controller, civil defence, emergency management, and then also to receive a confidential update on Plan Change 10. So there, because of these 2 items, the public are being excluded to protect the privacy of persons and also to maintain legal professional privilege. So I'm going to call for a mover and a seconder, please, that this committee move into public excluded. Thank you, Mrs. Trumper. Thank you, Councillor Hunt. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, thank you.